organize and read your comments and questions. So it will be useful for you to leave them at the beginning. If your question is for any expert in particular, we appreciate if you write down the name of that said expert. And we also kindly ask you to write down the country or your country of residence. And also we remind you that the expectations we have is not only that you learn from our experts, but also to use this as an opportunity of exchange and to share ideas. So we ask you to share your ideas in terms of any programs that you are working on, documents, as well as other initiatives to contribute to this debate. You can open your microphones. So that will be it. One last suggestion is for panelists, you will see a chronometer with a specific time designated for all of you. So we kindly ask you to be mindful of the time. So I am going to introduce our first panelist, Alejandro Morduchovich, has a degree in economics from the University of Buenos Aires and postgraduate in economics from Torquato Institute. He is a researcher and senior economist specialized in planning, administration, public policy analysis, and economics and financing of education. In the field of administration and planning, he has worked on the development and implementation of processes re-engineering in education systems, on the design of teaching careers, and carried out studies on teaching administration, school effectiveness, and sectorial supply and demand planning. With respect to the field of economics and financing, he has participated in the design of models to optimize efficiency in resource allocation in education. He was a lead education specialist in education division of the Inter-American Development Bank. So you have 12 minutes, Alejandro. Thank you very much, Natalia. Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much to the IIEP UNESCO for this invitation, more specifically Luri Cardini for his trust in big data and in planning. So I will begin. Time is running. So this will be kind of a weird presentation because it's a presentation on something that doesn't exist yet or something that should exist. But this is nothing related to futurologism because this hasn't anything to do with technological advancements. This is a development that already exists and will be continued developing, but in reality, its potential depends on us interested in educational planning as actors participating in this planning, and of course, on what administrations do, the administration do with its potential. So I will be focusing my presentation in four basic aspects out of many aspects that big data presents. We have been working for almost 2 years now with Asnavar, who has participated as well with me. And we together created this presentation, and we will publish a document as well. So the first topic is in terms of possibilities that big data offers for education planning. So the intention here is not to talk about a classic approach in education planning, but we have to recognize that we based that planning in the accumulation of information and data that was processed through administration offices, for example, in student enrollment or population censuses. But all of these had to do with studies that were conducted based on linear systems. And of course, the IIEP in UNESCO promoted this type of use of data. So we were left with a lot of information that used for future projections and goals that we would have on for education systems. These were linear systems, and we advanced in that regard in terms of social demands projects, also in production studies in terms of supply and processes, products. Those indicators, when we began to develop those indicators, we were also based on this linear approach, demand in students, internal efficiencies, also supply, teachers, educational centers. And from there, we we thought of certain expectations. So big data is not here to replace that. It has a great potential to serve as a complement for using that big amount of information. So the proposal with big data now is to think educational planning in a different way. Of course, we always think of that change in education planning. We don't have an answer yet. Of course, we want a transformation in that regard, but we are able to think that information systems from that education planning must be changed. However, what we do know so far is that big data has a lot to offer in educational planning and also the other way around. So we are not sure yet if this is a new stage, but we should consider to think of this in a different way. So having said this, let's talk about big data and let's talk about the few references that we know in terms of big data and how it can be used in educational planning. I will give you a few data. In 2023, it is expected that 2/3 of the world population will we spend 6 hours online, or at least that's the expectations. This generates billions of data. It's an indefinite number of data that are stored and have the potential of being used. And this allows us to start thinking of big data, having a high volume of data that could be used and are available. This is an important aspect because not only big data has to do with the amount of data, but also it tells us on what do we think when we interact and write comments on social media that creates a digital footprint that can be used and in other aspects, more specifically in the field of education. So big data is a system that produces data that we can use for our work. It's not only the amount of data, but also the diversity of it, which is impressive. Walter Sosa Escudero says that we shouldn't be talking about big data as new data, that we have available from our interactions with smartphones or other devices on the internet. So this great amount of data and this diversity is what we need to use and take advantage of. These data are very well structured, are not well structured. These are different data. It's not like an Excel sheet. Let's think of a huge room with thousands of unarranged pictures and with our pictures or images. So the idea is to organize them and classify them in a certain way. We can use a timeline to arrange those pictures in terms of who we are with on that picture, cities visited. So the idea is to bring that whole set of disorganized information and arrange that. So the important point here is the tools that traditional education planning is supported on. There are two ways to work with that information. And I'm talking about an idea of associations that are possible here. For example, we have a big amount of images, so let's think of how we can arrange them. And sometimes we think of this context of the pandemic. If we were using big data in education during the pandemic, when the people began to realize that it was possible to work remotely, we could have started to think, what are those interests? Where is people moving? What cities or what schools are those students are going, or not only the places that people were moving to, but also other aspects. For example, by that possibility, we could thought of what pedagogical resources those schools were using, to what extent, or what curricular programs were being implemented. So those are the associations. In education, at the same time, we have a great advantage, which is the accumulated experience, researching knowledge on certain topics that can help you to establish causal models, to analyze school dropouts, teacher workload, and student workload. And big data can complement and help us to support with data all these theories or hypotheses that we may understand. For example, in school dropouts, it has evolved. 12 years ago, the greatest prediction that we had in big data was age. We didn't think of an older student was at risk of being a school dropout. So there was an expansion and conceptualization of early alert systems to prevent dropouts and to consider the information at school. So in what ways big data can complement or support this? Let's take an example. We see sometimes very overloaded teachers, and we don't know to what extent education systems collect this type of data. It's like this, for example, online games or virtual wallets for students, all of that is registered and could be used to see to what extent this has an effect in the school dropouts possibilities, and how much time students spend on this, if this is only a perception or if this is becoming a real issue.
Podría acompañar con esa información que queda registrada en Internet, digamos.
So big data could complement with this information that is in the internet, what is going on there. At least we could start to think on the teachers' well-being or lack of well-being through their participation in the social media. We could understand how is this evolving, conceptualizing, and provide data to support and see how is this evolving. And the concerns of the teachers that are omnipresent, but also in their relationship with the families and government. The third of the 4 points that I had to share with you, I don't have much time left, is the context and classic educational planning and the one based on big data. We see different nuances and possibilities in comparison with both possibilities. I mentioned some, for instance, the amount. We have a big volume of data, but it's limited because it is in the instruments, in the form sheets, and big data offer this huge amount, almost infinite amount of information, but destructured. The questions are that somehow what they did was condition the instruments that they have to prepare instrument for census, and this is what provided the answers or allowed to make questions. Now the questions we have to do based on the information that is there is that has to be connected with the surveys, and we have to extract it from internet and start to ask and re-ask if this is a social problem or if this has an importance, and this information will be used. So the last of the 4 points, which is a little agenda to open the discussion. If we are talking about planning, we have to think on what do you have to propose for the future. The 3 lines of actions that we thought about are, first of all, digitalize educational systems to generate quality data. It sounds obvious, but it's not that much. As I started in the beginning of the presentation, we are still in a almost a handicraft stage. And I would like to restate that digitalize doesn't mean more work for teachers and schools, because it seems that schools are in the service of the information systems and not the other way around. We are sometimes digitalizing information without giving it a meaning, and use existing digital data from state. We know that they do not dialogue. There's a lot of information there, and it is not used to incorporate because they are not being used. And the third recommendation is using data coming from other sources, as those generated by smartphones, apps, social media, so on and so forth, which is the third. And the fourth, there was a fourth issue, which is ethics. This is somehow in the agenda, and we can discuss it as sometimes a very critical. And a final comment, I had many, but Malthus used to say, it's hard not to think on them when we think on planning. It is not planning that is under crisis, but the capacity of conceive it in a different way. And big data, what allows us is think out of the box and start to think this planning in a different way. We make ourselves this question, and I share with you if educational planning will change. We cannot say that. I believe so, but I cannot affirm. We have this possibility, but we have to start to work in the future of the systems of information in function of what big data offer. Considering the educational planning, it is counting with educational administrations that can predict the problems instead of running from them. So we believe these educational systems have a major possibility of, when it started 21st century in terms of information, things that considering things that could have been done in 20th century. We cannot expect 30, 50 years and say, well, we had big data, but we didn't use it. I hope we don't leave this opportunity. Thank you very much.
Gracias a vos, y mi promesa es recuperar estos conceptos que estuviste
Alejandro, thank you very much. And my proposal is to recover. I would like to discuss a little bit more these lines of actions, because what we need are proposals to make these actions concrete. So in a moment of exchange, you will have some more minutes to discuss it. To continue with the panel, I would like now to present my colleague, Fernanda Luna. She has a master's degree in design in educational programs in Argentina, a long trajectory in educational public policies in Argentina. In addition, she was consultant in international organisms like UNDP, UNICEF, NIDB, and currently she's coordinator of management and mobilization in the Office for the Latin America and Caribbean of IIPE UNESCO. Fernanda will discuss the use of the so-called early alert systems and its history in Latin America. Thank you very much. Do I have to adjust something? Can you see my presentation? Yes, you just have to press presentation mode. And I would like to remember that you can make questions and comments in the chat and set what topics you want Alejandro to discuss into depth. And remember, if you want to, and we have time to, we can also, if we have time left, we can open your microphones. You can use the raise hand icon. And, okay, perfect. Thank you. Well, thank you very much, Nati, for the presentation. I would like to greet my colleagues, Alejandro and Gregory. It's an honor to be with you sharing this panel. But before starting, I would like to say that I'm presenting a paper that will be published with Nati Montes, with whom we work with this early alert systems in UNESCO. And you will find this study in the systems of evaluation for educational management. Well, now I'll start. Well, the topic of my panel is approaching the early alert systems as an answer to a problem. So by following educational trajectories, this is one of the major challenges of most of the countries in the region to provide quality education for all. We know that in educational investigation in the last 10 years, considering this, the trajectory to achieve more fair systems, and this is cross-sectional to all modalities of learning and teaching and learning. But it's key, especially when we go from childhood to adolescence, or to the from primary education to secondary education. To give you a context of the importance of the problem, I will present three pieces of three data that are represent the trajectory. I'm sorry. Here, first datum, the percentage of adolescents that do not attend first cycle and the second cycle on secondary education. We see here there is a gap in the first cycle and second cycle of secondary education. In percentages, there is a loss of students that drop out and do not attend the second part of secondary education, which is the step to access peer education. So here we have the superior or second cycle of secondary, 18% compared. So in a second moment, I'm sorry, has to do with the overaged students, which is one of the factors that we measure when we consider dropping out. We see that the average for the region of overaged students is 24.3% for regional, but we know that these averages correspond to some realities. And if we break down to economic bias, we see that it's even 27.1% for low-income home dwellings, and a third chart is the finish rate for secondary. We see 90.8% for students as a whole, but when we break down into economic, we know that 70% belong to the low-income families, and 90%, more than 90%, to higher income families. So this represents a problem in education, to finish education. And there we insert the early alert systems, identify those students whose trajectory are interrupted, and how to continue the trajectory. something very important is always more expensive to recover children that are already out of the system than maintaining those who are still in the system. So we have the early alerts to avoid these risky situations. So let's have a classic definition of early alert systems. This is a tool that is used for protecting school trajectories and identify students at risk and the factors that put them in risk or vulnerability. These systems allow, on one side, identify students at risk, and on the other hand, actions to maintain their attendance in school. So when these two issues are connected, we generate a possibility so that policies could have an influence in their educational trajectories. So not in all in sectors we have this notion that is connected to, for instance, climate events, catastrophic. So when we have an early alert for a catastrophe, is to have immediate action and with an alert. What happens in education? These events that require intervention are not punctual events, but processes that happen throughout the educational trajectory that require a follow-up to avoid the situations of interruption. So it is important to highlight that there are different factors that influence educational trajectory that has to do with social, economic, and family environment, which consider the material conditions, situations of vulnerability, forced work, educational environment that the caretakers can provide. Then we have the educational factors that has to do with a very educational process. The academic way that has to do with absenteeism, and institutional factors where we also that are also incorporated here that has to do with the educational proposal of the state, the study plan, the rotation and absenteeism of teachers, and the school environment. These are factors that will affect this process of education trajectory, and some of them incremented. One is the accumulation or combination of these factors that lead to a higher level of dropout and generate a higher probability of exclusion of these students. So the question that is key is to understand that dropping out is not punctual, but it occurs throughout a process. And that's why it is important to raise alerts about a series of factors throughout this process. So what conditions do we need to implement these early alert systems? Here we have a set of conditions that can be organized. Here is not in a proper order, but that they can be connected in other way. One has to do with the data governance. This condition requires the system to have a clear orientation and meaning, and actions and instruments that enable it. So an institutional component and resources that has to, the institutional component has to do with norms, protocols, and a framework, and regulations related to data protection and analytic models, and resources to be used in technology and working teams. Then a second part that is very important, the integration of information systems. Here we consider several different issues. One has to do with interoperability. In the previous panel, we saw that the systems of informations are the importance that they could interoperate, that they could be interconnected and structured, so we can have a good overview of the student, to have not only the information of the school development, but also that has to do with the social, economic, and family environment. There is another important issue with the number of teachers or the names and independent registration of schools and students, so we can identify who is passing through a difficulty, which is extremely important. So we put that as one of the relevant conditions for the systems of early alert systems. And the other is how is this information is available according to identifying according to the needs, and identifying the needs of the user so we can intervene in a timely fashion with policies that help. The second issue are the type of variables that we need to incorporate in early alert systems. Individual are the classic ones: academic performance, attendance, interruptions in the trajectory, so on and so forth. The institutional ones, we incorporate the school environment, the teacher absenteeism, plan of studies, problems that can be identified by the board of the school, and the third, the family context. It is important to know if these students, children, and adolescents have other tasks and chores at home, like caretaking, and the social economic level and vulnerability. And as a third dimension here, point that sound very important to discuss and define, has to do with the levels of intervention. It's important to consider at what stage will these interventions be applied? When should we intervene? And what are the lines of actions that we should conduct?
As well as the timing, also monitoring its impact, the impact of early alert systems, not only with its implementation and evaluation, as well as that intervention assessment. Those interventions are actually attaining those goals or reaching those goals, as well as the sensibilization of actors. So very briefly, I'm going to comment on two aspects. First, the implementation of early alert systems in Latin America are very initial. So we have identified nominal records. There are other countries that have early alert systems that are decentralized, and there are other aspects that were identified related to the regular framework. We have identified only 2 countries that have implemented those regulations in terms of early alert systems, and others don't have these regulatory frameworks. There are other dimensions: assistance, repetence, school performance, as well as other life or living conditions. In terms of use, we found that there are uses in terms or at a central level, mostly for monitoring, other axis of monitoring that has to do with repetence, and we have to design focused actions. Also, in terms of central management, there are other schools or jurisdictions that have higher amount of students at risk, and other actions at a local level that have to do with supervisors and teaching staff, where we have more monitoring in terms of tutorships, family communication, and other approaches around the students. So what are the challenges? I would like to mention some challenges that we have identified in terms of EAS. There are some initial developments in the region, so there is almost none information in terms of that assessment of the impact in the technologies implemented. What are the algorithms, user levels that are there is very little information on the incorporation of early alert system. I'm not going to go over all of this again, but the last challenges are the identification of a problem, the importance of do a national level diagnosis to review the exclusion problem, taking into account regional and local realities, and then from there to move forward the design of interventions that are going to be articulated with these information systems. Then, if we are going to talk about the early alert systems per se, is to set defined goals, whether they are going to be systems that are going to be related to actions that are triggered depending on how those alerts are developing. So it is important to understand whether they are going to be monitored or we are going to be considering real trajectories, or whether we are going to use those tools based on predefined aspects where we can use artificial intelligence tools. That's what we need to consider when designing these systems. So in order to implement strong systems, we need to understand the importance of nominal records and having this this organization of personal data in terms of school performance, as well as other aspects that are related to the socioeconomical and family environment. We need that data, of course, that will benefit to the success of these early alert systems. I already mentioned as well the fact of the lack of information in terms of early alert system of information systems. And finally, I'm going to talk about the regulatory frameworks. There is an importance of having regulatory frameworks to regulate the use of information systems, and there's an importance to guarantee of the data protection in this case. And to finish, I'm going to bring a citation here from a singer that I really like. Is loving the journey more than the outcome. So the idea here is to being able to monitor and reach to a better successful outcome, and not only looking at that problem with the school dropouts, but also looking at that journey that has to do with access or lack of access, and also school performance in order to have a successful trajectory. So thank you very much, and apologies for any inconvenience. So thank you very much, Fernanda. I have here a difficult task because all your presentations are so interesting. But now I am going to present Gregory Elacqua. So here we have it for his presentation. He has a PhD in Princeton University. He's been a professor of public policies at Diego Portales University and Adolfo Ibáñez University of Chile. He has written academic articles and technical reports on education in Latin America. He has also participated in policy education reforms, along with 3 ministers of education and a representative in the Senate in Chile. Gregory will delve in the use of technology to attain an equitable distribution and teacher allocation in schools. Thank you very much, Natalia, for this invitation and for being here along with brilliant colleagues as Alejandro and Fernanda. So I will expose the motives for these presentations. Some topics are not often covered, which has to do with resource allocation in education to improve learnings, but also to include an important component of any budget of any country, which is around 80 or 70%, which are the challenges on teacher allocation. So the current challenge has to do whether if most, and we showed this in an IDB report, we found out that teachers, or in most countries, normally are allocated in municipalities, states, and that application process and selection process is not that clear and is very difficult for teachers. And this poses a challenge in terms of efficiency and quality. First, education institutions at schools and local governments have to invest an excessive amount of time reviewing those applications from teachers, and teachers have to go through long and tiring processes. A picture that you see here is of a venue in Argentina where teachers are called one by one at an office. And this is common in Latin America. This is a way of asking teachers to come. So every teacher comes one by one, and depending on the system, they have to go to the municipality or to the local government institution to find one place to be. And another picture is from teacher archives, when teacher asks to be transferred or when they are looking for vacant positions. So this is an issue. The challenge that in here is the inequalities. We see unequal results. So less favored schools have a difficulty in the region to attract qualified teachers, and others are allocated temporarily. And as the evidence shows, they have lower performance in terms of learning of students, and this generates socioeconomic gaps in learnings. So a solution that from the IDB is being proposed along with governments in the region are centralized digital mechanisms for teacher allocation in schools. But how do they work? What is the design of the teacher allocation system that is transparent and equal? There is a front end and a back end. The front end is basically the platform where teachers send their proposals. So this includes the localization of the vacant position, as well as other indicators, the size of the school location, specialty, that can help teachers to make a well-based decision on where they are going to work. So teachers see the available vacancies and they create a ranking and send their applications to the system. That's what the teachers do in that front-end platform. Then at the back end, there is something very common that centralized systems use, which is an algorithm of acceptance. So what they do is to allocate teachers in an automated way according to their own preferences and according to a teacher score given by the government. Certain countries, as the ones that I'm going to mention here, have scoring systems. So teachers have to go through tests and they have a score, so that allocation will depend on that scoring. Other countries score teachers according to their own experiences, degrees, and that will depend on each country's system. So not many countries have these systems in place, the ones that I described now, but there are three interesting examples that I'm going to mention. Ecuador has Quiero Ser Maestro, Peru has Nombramiento Docente, and São Paulo has a different system which is based on transference. So what is the evidence of these systems? First, we have positive results from these mechanisms. We have rigorous evaluations, and you can have access to that is in the presentation, where we show two interesting results. One of it is the improvement of that match rate between the teacher and the school. So according to these systems, the chances of choosing a school of preference for teachers is higher. And the evidence shows that when teachers are more satisfied and working where they want to work, they achieve better results with students. But there's another interesting result in terms of quality or average quality of teachers that get a job. A third result that I want to highlight here, and I saw a comment on Alejandro's presentation related to this topic, is that these systems can save amounts of money for the administrations. And I want to highlight Sao Paulo City, which is one of the biggest school districts in Latin America. They have over 50,000 teachers, and each year around 20%, around 10,000 teachers, request to be reallocated. So there are small teams at the administrations that had to handle these transfers, and they dedicated a lot of effort and energy while being very efficient. So they centralized their digital system where teachers go online, very similar to the design or the system that I just showed, to manage this big amount of transfers every year. However, and this is something that we can see in these three systems, inequities is persistent. Although they are centralized systems, there is a lot of information inert that is a barrier. So in terms of Peru, 40% of those vacancies are not filled. So 77% of schools are not chosen. I'm going to provide two examples. 77% of intercultural bilingual schools that include indigenous students or students from remote areas do not have applications. Another example is in the Amazon region in Loreto, 83% of vacancies were not chosen. So this creates a huge gaps in teacher allocation. So despite the situation, there are many inefficiencies in this process. What we found in Peru is a high density of applications. So some teachers do not apply for certain schools, those that are in remote areas, but a high amount of teachers want to apply for a few schools. So 20 schools had more than 10 applications. So this creates delays and in the process, which leads to lack of teachers in the systems. That's the case of Peru. So we work with Ecuador and Peru and their governments using new technologies and behavioral economics techniques to optimize these processes and reduce inefficiencies and improve that inequality gap. So these are cost-effective strategies. The first is a nudges strategy from behavioral economics. What we did in Peru, for example, is that through focus groups, we realized that teachers didn't know about bonuses or money or economic incentives that rural schools offered to attract more teachers. And sometimes there were over 30% of their salaries. So what we did with the government is to highlight these schools. So money incentives were important, so teachers knew how much they were exactly making. So based on behavioral economic, we also focused on motives from teachers, for example, saying them, you could have a bigger impact by working at this school. In Ecuador, we highlighted on the same platform a list of the most vulnerable schools that needed certified teachers. So in this case, I can talk about the results afterwards. There were very positive results with zero cost to attract teachers to most vulnerable schools. We also conducted new studies, and one of them was based on attacking or tackling the inefficiency process. When we saw that teachers were only applying for the most demanded schools, we sent out an alert. We told them, well, this is a high demand schools, you may not find here a job. So the recommendation was to go back to the platform and alter that application and add another option. And we made recommendations for them. So this brought positive results, and other teachers found jobs and schools got better teachers. And now we are conducting new studies. We are exploring possibilities where we use, for example, recommendation engines. When teachers are applying, we recommend other schools similar to the ones that they are applying to, as well as we are exploring the possibility of introducing generative AI to help teachers during their application processes. So I'm very happy to share with you any aspect of this initiative. So I have 4 key lessons here. First, the centralized and digital teacher allocation increases transparency, efficiency, and equitable access to schools. Secondly, despite this situation, there are still challenges as information barriers, which are still creating inequalities and application congestion. Third, low-cost technology strategies based on behavioral economy have improved results when attracting better teachers to remote schools and unfavored schools. And lastly, these applications can include in a low-cost way tackling challenges in education by attracting better candidates from schools to career education, teacher retention, that have a higher priority of abandoning their profession.
Producing absenteeism of teachers and students, and support families when electing a school, and use new technologies to improve the results. So thank you very much, and I will be delighted to hear your comments and questions. Thank you very much, Gregory. There are many questions coming both from YouTube and chat. Some people raise their hands, but I would like to comply with the time in the panel. We just have 13 minutes, so I propose a first round of questions, and then I have Wellington Basto that left a comment in the chat. Wellington, if you want to raise your hand and identify yourself, and the same with Ramon Ortega, that could be really interesting to hear and interact with you. A question to Alejandro, and this question is thought in how the strategic planning can increase the use of the data to guarantee that the systems are aligned in the long run, and what are the main obstacles to integrate big data in education? 2 minutes. Thank you very much. Actually, I would need all the time in the world, but planning is not this is not in agenda of planning so far. There is a whole world out there and we have to start to think in all of that, and all this generation of information is advancing, at large steps, and we are using that. And by means of conversations, discussions we had with platform sites and so on, we know that even when we start to comment the possibility of educational planning, they got really surprised with the possibility of using this information. And also obstacles. Part of the obstacles currently, first of all, the very interest of governments and to what extent they can internalize the possibility and for all of us. And the second, the information about human resources. And we have to start to prepare them because we answered many questions, but we need planning to form data science. We need a lot of data to start to dialogue interdisciplinary with other colleagues. It is very interesting what you said in terms of obstacles on how to rethink, because I believe they are key. So we could design things, and there are other ways to do it. And considering that we are discussing obstacles, Fernanda, with her presentation about the early alert systems, what would be the factors to facilitate or that are hurdles for the development of early alert systems in the region? Thank you, Natalia. As factors, I may identify 4 that facilitate and other 4 that are obstacles. Something that makes this easier is recognizing that there is a problem, educational problem, a problem with trajectories, and consider as states, as Ministry of Education, that there is a problem in educational trajectories, identify that as a problem and act upon that. Having systems of robust information is something that will make the implementation of information system easier, systems that interoperate, and not having compartmentalized systems of information, as we know is the case. This would help implementing the system. Something else that would make easy thinking in a bottom-up approach. The very teachers and schools identify these students with interrupted or at-risk trajectories. So thinking on information systems from schools and interventions with the schools will make the incorporation of the systems easier. So they have an impact and can lead to a change in these school trajectories. The factors that cause obstacles, on them we can identify technical challenges and also resources that have to do with human resources that could design the systems that have a proper technology, sustained development, and the other thing is the legal framework, assuming that this is a policy that is sustainable within time with a legal framework that protects private data. So the systems are sustainable a long time. And the other factor has to do with data, generating this culture in educational secretaries, departments, and give them the importance they must have to change educational trajectories. And in terms of planning, give space so these trajectories are modified. Thank you very much, Fer. Gregory, there is a question here about, well, in terms of the avant-garde technologies that you presented, the issue of economy of behavior to achieve this equitable assignment of teachers. We have questions Could you mention the costs and impacts of these interventions? If you could do that in 2 minutes. Thank you. We carried out many experiments in large scale in Peru with thousands of teachers, Ecuador as well. We just made one with 50,000 teachers in Peru, which allow for testing and evaluating the causal effect of these techniques that are basically cost zero. This is a code string for IT personnel in the platform, very low cost. And in Peru and Ecuador, with these nudges, these techniques of behavioral economy, we can move 3 to 5% of teachers to less favored schools that previously only have substitute teachers and couldn't have certified ones. So we were able to elevate from 3 to 5% the teachers that were assigned to these schools, which is a true impact in terms of quality. As for the early alert system, we were able to increase the percentage of teachers that find jobs. Many teachers wanted the same vacancies, and we could increase the number of teachers that find job, which is important for the government, otherwise they have to open again the following year, and also for the teachers, so they have a job and don't have to wait the following year. In Ecuador, these alerts were able to survey teachers with good performance, because all teachers wanted the same school. So these were two results in terms of equity and efficiency, but with very low cost interventions. Thank you very much, Gregory. And now let's see if we can do that. I'm identifying some interesting questions of people in the room, and I would like to see Diego Leal. Are you there to make your question live on a microphone? Wellington, we would like to hear you. And we also have Ramon Ortega. Diego Leal. Hello, Natalia. Good morning, everyone, and congratulations for the events and so interesting ideas. I would like to ask, going back to what we discussed yesterday, considering the political changes that are so frequent in our region, do you see a role for the private sector? A recent survey, they questioned the technical schools, for instance, but in this experience, we see that sometimes our governments have these comings and goings and don't have capacity of continuing to a project that other companies could not do. For instance, think like school rent or park rangers. How do you see the opportunity of involving these stakeholders? Thank you, Diego. I ask you to make short comments, if I may. Of course, the major contrast we have is that before, information was generated by government with a census, with dwelling surveys, and now we depend on private, like platforms and pages and social media, messengers. These are all private. And the other question I want to relate is the ethics. I didn't mention it, but it is already part that the organisms like UNESCO, IDB are working on that. So that's why I say I don't have to call to talk about the ethics because and the information that is being generated and possible risks, as we would be taking everything to another level, and we have to be extremely careful. We advanced a lot, but it happens that no, I don't want to be critical, but we have to be careful because we discussed a lot about ethics in data use, but we don't have that much data use. So we have to balance a little more. I wouldn't say no longer be theoretical, but because in the private sector, we need a new stakeholder to see on how we work and how do we interact with all due care.
Rápido, en términos de las, creo que el sector privado juega un rol muy importante, sobre todo en el desarrollo de las innovaciones.
Well, the private sector has a very important role in the development of innovations. I'm in Recife, in Brazil, and we are developing. But the challenge in public policies on innovation, on how to use government capacity so they can continue to work and not depend always on the private sector. But I believe the private sector is key, especially in the area of technology. Thank you very much, Gregory. Well, I'm already late, but if Wellington and Ramon Ortega want to make their questions, this is the moment to open your cameras and microphones. Otherwise, we will close this panel. I can't see you. That's why I'm in doubt here. Very well. Well, there we have Wellington. It will be a pleasure to hear you. Can we allow him to open microphone, enable, and we have translation in other languages. If someone can help him to open his microphone. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm sorry, I was having a problem to open the microphone. My question is generalized. It is about the technological transposition or translation to education. Here in Brazil, we have great effort of the ministry considering technologies, but we see that every new government that comes don't continue policies, and the precarization of teachers' works, especially with the use of technology, is huge. So what can we do as an institution to improve with the use of technology without having their work transformed into a precarious job? Who would like to answer? If no one, I can say something with, well, very good question. First of all, what we see that many of the young teachers are more connected and technological than us, especially the new ones, as we've been working with new teachers. But what we find is that there is a limit in terms, and this is very important, that these interventions have to have an easy design, able to access from a smartphone. More than 70–80% of teachers access platforms through smartphones and not computer. I think this is an important data. And we have to, what we are working now in Chile is the use of technologies. I don't know how to say this. to engage more professors. And we had an experience in Chile with chatbots, but it didn't work. So we are trying to develop something to engage more teachers. But in terms of connectivity, almost all of them through smartphone. And this is very important for the design of intervention for any technology. Thank you very much. Well, we have our time is over, so I won't open to other comments. I was hoping to do a summary of everything I learned, but I will leave this for another opportunity. I thought in the first question we were discussing today on how digital technologies may improve the educational planning and management. I think it was answered, but if you do not feel so, we have opportunity of continue to discuss and debate these topics through two communities of experts that we have in the IIP UNESCO proposal, and that we have here a representative of UNESCO Santiago is a community and of a educational planning data. Fernando will give us more orientation. I see a lot of people that are very well known with work in the area. So I invite you all to take part in these communities, because this is something that you proved that it is being done. It is being implemented. So I believe that showing and giving visibility to these initiatives and gather strength from different sectors so we can have these projects more concrete, regionally and locally. So I invite to the data community and to the community we launched yesterday about education and technology, two topics that are connected and articulated. Both communities are open. You just have to apply, because it is for certain profiles like academia, public servants, investigators, researchers in the topic, private sector, educational private sector. The idea is to generate continuous dialogues. And I learned a lot. Thank you very much to all of you. And I pass the floor now to Fernando Salvatierra to close this panel. Thank you very much, Natalia, Alejandro, Gregory, for this amazing panel that covered the importance of digital technologies for planning policies and the need of advancing in the digitalization of systems and processes from schools to scale up to all educational system with interoperability with other systems that we can use as a source of information, using data science to help decision making, to improve education, which is our main goal. Thank you very much to all of you, all the people that took part in the panel in this 2023 edition of the Regional Forum of Educational Policies. And as we mentioned, to download your participation certificates, we ask you to just fill in a form, in a survey, and whose link is in the chat. And or you can also read the QR code that you see now in the screen. You can fill in the form, in the survey, in the language of your preference. And we also will take this opportunity to share once again the link of this flaming community of education and technology to continue the debate that happened in this forum. And we conclude with that the session of panels for educational policies. And thank all of those who were with us during the journey. And we will soon start our workshops that are exclusive for representatives of education ministries and departments, and for our representatives of UNESCO offices. So for those invited to the workshop, you have to access the other link in the Zoom that you can find in your emails or in the UNESCO page. So we will have now 7 minutes break, and we meet once again at 12:30 in Argentina. So this room will be closed. It was a pleasure. Thank you very much. See you soon.